How much do you love your sibling? Would you commit a crime if they asked you to? Andrew was a good person. He was kind, caring, and loyal. He would do anything for his family, and so when his sister asked him to get rid of her boyfriend, he did. Let's dive in. Andrew Prince Saw was born in South Korea to a traditional family. His dad, Ronald Saw, was a high-ranking military officer, while his mom, Elizabeth, worked as a pharmacist. Andrew had a sister, Catherine, who was 5 years older. As far as everyone was concerned, this was a nice, normal family. But behind closed doors, these things kind of were messed up, as we'll soon find out. Before Andrew was born, his parents had another son, Bae-young Chol. He was a playful and curious boy, and was to be the heir of the family fortune by the Korean tradition. One day, Bae-young was playing on the roof. He slipped and fell, leaving the family without an heir or someone to carry on the family name. The Korean culture did not place a lot of importance on girls. They were usually seen as outsiders who would leave the family once they got married. So being a traditional man, Robert felt that he needed to replace the son that he'd lost. He turned to his wife and demanded a male heir. Elizabeth was already in her 40s and was not sure whether she would get pregnant again. But Robert gave her an ultimatum, saying it's either she give him a son or they got a divorce. Elizabeth was desperate. She didn't want to lose her marriage, so she tried everything. She took all the fertility medicine she could find, and luckily it worked. 9 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful boy that she named Andrew. Interestingly, Andrew had a birthmark in the same place as his older brother. His parents took this to mean that their eldest son had come back to life. So as you can imagine, Andrew was their absolute pride and joy. A few years after Andrew was born, the Saw family decided to move to the US, hoping to start a new life. They settled in Chicago, Illinois, and opened a small family business. And Andrew, while as young as 4 years old, was like his parents' right-hand man. With so much to do, Andrew had a pretty tight schedule. His dad would wake him up at 5 in the morning, and they would go buy stuff for the store before going to school. After school, Andrew would go to the store and help stack the shelves, clean up, and even work at the counter until 8 p.m. This may not seem like a normal childhood for most people, but to Andrew, it was just what he was supposed to do. And he did it wholeheartedly, without complaining or asking questions. Andrew was also pretty brilliant and got good grades in school, which made his parents prouder. He was their favorite, and they would brag about him to everyone. On the other hand, they considered Catherine as the black sheep of the family. She did whatever she wanted, and she would always get into trouble. Being a girl, Catherine kind of felt like her parents didn't love her and like she didn't belong, which is sad when you think about it. So Catherine was probably acting out to get her parents' attention. She would talk back, run away from home, and do everything her parents asked her not to. This made her father mad, and he would often say some hurtful things to her like, "You are not my daughter," and basically just make her feel terrible. They would argue a lot, and he would even beat her. Sadly, Catherine grew up feeling unwanted and unloved by her own family. This made Catherine more resentful and rebellious, and she and her dad never got along. As Catherine turned 15, things would only get worse. She was now a beautiful, popular teenage girl, and boys were always after her. One day, a phone call to her house damaged the little relationship she had with her dad. When Robert picked up the phone, a Latino guy at the end asked, "Where is your daughter?" To an old-fashioned religious man, this was plain disrespectful. He felt like his daughter was dishonoring the family, and he went to confront her. They got into a fight which quickly turned physical when he slapped her. Catherine, not being one to back down, scratched him across the chest, drawing blood. Robert was completely taken by surprise. He looked at his ripped shirt and saw blood, and he just lost it. He grabbed Catherine, took a jar of gasoline, and on both of them saying, "Let's die together." He took a lighter from his pocket and was about to light it when Elizabeth came rushing in and stopped him. Catherine fell back crying as little Andrew watched in horror. Robert disowned Catherine after that. He and Elizabeth decided that they'll just wait until she's 18 and she can get married and leave the house. When Andrew was 11 years old, his dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer and was told that he didn't have much time left. Andrew stayed by his father's side, watching over him and taking care of him. He went out of his way to make sure that his dad got everything he needed, even tying a string on his wrist so his dad could wake him at any moment. A local Korean newspaper did a story about him, calling him the good son. He spent about a month in the hospital until his dad had passed on. But before he died, Robert made Andrew promise that he would protect and care for his mom at all times. All this while, Catherine was nowhere to be found. She was out doing her own thing, not caring that her dad was fighting for his life. When Robert passed on, Catherine came only for a second, looked at his body and said, "Okay," then left. Andrew says that his sister was was happy that their father died. With the death of her husband, Elizabeth felt completely lost. She did not know what to do or where to start. She ended up depending on Andrew, who she felt understood her pain. Andrew was 11 years old and had to shoulder a huge responsibility as the man of the house. Keep in mind that he also lost his dad, but Andrew did his best to try and console his mom, helping out around the house and keep good school grades. The family was also not doing so well financially, and Elizabeth started a small dry cleaning business for upkeep. And while Andrew was trying to juggle everything, Catherine was having the time of her life. She would come home whenever she wanted, and she was pretty much uncontrollable. It was during this time that she came to meet Robert O'Dubain at a local gym. Robert was 7 years older than Catherine and was described as a pretty nice guy, fun-loving, and family-oriented. The two started dating and even introduced each other to their respective families. In October 1987, Andrew came home from school and saw police cars outside his mom's store. He saw Catherine crying as Robert held her in his arms, trying to comfort her. Robert told Andrew that his mom was no more. Elizabeth had been stabbed multiple times in what seemed like a robbery gone wrong, but looking at how many times Elizabeth was stabbed, police started doubting that it was a normal robbery. They suspected that the person responsible must have been harboring some grudge and was known to Elizabeth, but since they had nothing to go by, the case went cold. Andrew was completely devastated. He was now an orphan, with no one but his sister. He felt like he'd failed his mom by not being there to protect her, and for some reason, he had to wipe his mother's blood after the incident. This must have been pretty traumatic for him. Since Catherine was 18 years old, she became Andrew's legal guardian. Robert soon moved in with them, and they became some sort of family. Elizabeth and Robert had left an inheritance of $800,000 to Andrew, but since he was underage, Catherine controlled all the money, and Andrew basically had to depend on her. This meant that Andrew was at the mercy of his sister, and she controlled everything in his life: the school he went to, how he behaved, and even the kind of friends he made. She enrolled him in a posh private school and urged him to join the football team and become popular, and Andrew did everything his sister told him. For 3 years in a row, he was the class president before becoming the student body president. He also graduated as the valedictorian of his high school class and got a scholarship to Providence College in Rhode Island. Catherine also completely transformed Robert, giving him a new makeover with designer suits and expensive cars. She also bought a nightclub for him and made him a businessman. They got a new house where they would stay, the three of them as a family. Everything was great, and Catherine seemed to be handling things well. But then things with Robert started going south, and they started fighting. One day, Catherine called Andrew, claiming that Robert was hitting her. When he got home, he found Robert holding a gun and acting crazy. Andrew did not understand what was happening and thought that Robert was a jerk. He confronted him about hitting Catherine, and the two almost got into a physical fight, but Catherine stopped them. Despite the problems at home, Andrew went into college, but it was not long before Catherine started calling him to complain about Robert. She would tell him that Robert was hitting her and blowing away all their money, saying, "You should do something about it." Andrew was like, "What do you want me to do? Like, why don't you leave him?" Catherine then confided in him. She asked him to meet her at a restaurant, and she would tell him everything. When they met, Catherine told him that before their mother died, she and Robert were fighting about money when she said, "When my mom dies, we'll never have to worry about money again." And shortly after this conversation, their mom was found dead. She told Andrew that she knew Robert did it, but she had not asked him to. Like, seriously? What would you do after such a confession? Andrew was obviously furious. This guy had been living with them for all those years, yet he was his mom's killer. He felt betrayed by his sister and the person he had considered a brother. Why would his sister keep something like that from the cops? He took the phone to call the police, but Catherine stopped him, saying that she would also be in trouble since she was Robert's alibi. She told him that they had to get rid of Robert. Andrew did not want to do it, but Catherine kept bugging him, telling him to do it for his mom. She told him that it was his responsibility to defend the family's honor by getting rid of Robert. Finally, Andrew gave in. Catherine took him to the garage, gave him a gun, and told him to wait for Robert. She then called Robert and told him that her car had broken down and she needed his help. Andrew was just 19 years old when this was happening. He later said that while he was waiting in the garage, he battled with himself and he was like, "This is wrong." But then there was this loyalty that had been instilled in him at a young age. He remembered the promise he made to his father, his mom, and how he had to clean up his own mother's blood. And when the door opened, Andrew closed his eyes and pulled the trigger. Andrew was later arrested at the airport while trying to leave town. Police found Robert's wallet with his IDs and $65,000. At just 19 years old, Andrew was charged with first-degree homicide and robbery and was given 100 years in prison. It was later reduced to 80 years after appeal. Catherine was also arrested but later released on bail. Police believed that she was the mastermind and had controlled her brother. But 2 days before her trial, Catherine skipped town and went on the run. Her hearing went on without her, and she was found guilty and given life in prison without the possibility of parole if they ever captured her. For 6 months, Catherine lived in Hawaii, going by the name of Tiffany Escada. She was dating a surfer and personal trainer named Kelly Beck. One day, Catherine saw herself on the TV show America's Most Wanted and knew that her cover was blown. She was hiding for several weeks until she decided to turn herself into the FBI. Andrew is currently 47 years old and serving time at Dixon Correctional Center in Lee County, Illinois. He will be eligible for parole in 2031 when he will be 57 years old. He regrets what he did, and he now believes that his sister manipulated him and she is the one who had taken their mother's life. In prison, Andrew has been a model inmate who is always willing to help those around him. He's taken various courses while there and has earned certificates to teach his fellow inmates. He also works in the prison's hospital and helps care for dying inmates. For years, Andrew has been seeking a second chance in life by having his sentence reduced, but his latest petition was denied in January 2021. Despite this, he says he's not giving up. He's hopeful that one day, things will work out in his favor. Catherine is serving her life sentence less than 30 miles away in Logan Correction Center. Soon after her arrest, Andrew sent her a message trying to make up with her, but it didn't go too well. She wrote back saying, "Don't ever contact me again. I don't know who you are. I don't have a brother." Andrew was heartbroken because she was still his sister and nothing would change that. What if you could tell when someone's plotting against you? See beyond the fake smile and insincere friendship? Would the world be a better place? A woman who was trying to put her life back together and thought that she had found a friend. She let him move in with her when he had nowhere else to go. She never imagined that the so-called friend was a cold-blooded killer. Let's dive in. At 47 years old, Julie Riley was trying to put her life back together. The years where she left her mom to raise her daughter while she was still out partying with random guys were over, and she was ready to do what was best for her family. She was now talking to her family, getting help for drinking dependency, and reuniting with her daughter and grandson. She hoped to make up for all those lost years.
I've just grew up with my gran, that's I feel bad. She would always phone, she would try and be somebody else.
Julie had a really tough start in life. Her first daughter died before she was even a year old, and the other one could barely stand her. Her search for love and acceptance got her into a string of bad relationships that only made her miserable. At some point, she suffered a brain injury that ended up affecting her memory and speech. But Julie was willing to make up for all her mistakes. She was now super close to her grandson, and she and her daughter were finally getting along. She was also going to all her doctor's appointments and recovery meetings. Life was giving her a second chance, and things were looking up. Then in December 2017, Julie met someone, a guy who would destroy her life and leave her family in pain. His name was Andrew Wallace. He had just broken up with his girlfriend and needed a place to stay. He knew that Julie lived alone and that she needed constant care due to her brain injury, so he offered to take care of her if she would let him move in, and Julie agreed. When Julie's family heard this, they were not happy. Due to her history of bad relationships, her family thought that she was making a terrible mistake and that Andrew seemed like bad news. Julie's mom, Margaret, tried to talk her out of it, but refused to listen. She said that she knew the guy and that he was going to take care for her.
The last phone call I got for Julie, she told me that she was moving somebody in, a lodger in. She's thinking of moving this lodger in, and I disagreed with it.
Margaret did not hear from her daughter again until February 15th, 2017, when she got a call from the hospital telling her that Julie had not shown up to her doctor's appointments. At first, Margaret didn't think much of it. She was used to Julie going off the rails like this, but she always came around after she realized her mistake, so Margaret waited. Days went by, still no sign of Julie. She did not call or show up to any of her appointments. Her family tried reaching her, but the calls did not go through. They went to her appointment in Glasgow, but Julie wasn't there. Something was not right.
Since she hadn't been to appointments and stuff, that's when I was like, I just knew something was up. Like, She would always go.
Due to her brain injury, Julie's family was worried that she might have lost her memory and got lost somewhere. So in March 2017, they went to the police and filed a missing persons report. That's when the search for Julie finally began. Security camera footage showed her last sighting at a local grocery store on February 6th, and she was with a man who was later identified as Andrew. Nothing seemed out of place, and Julie looked calm and collected. The police also found out that this was also the last day that Julie had used her bus pass. Investigators then went to check her apartment to see if they would find something that explained her strange disappearance. They found the house looked pretty normal and recovered her diary where she wrote everything she did daily, probably due to her memory loss. Nothing in her diary told them that she had any plans to go away. The police scoured the city trying to find Julie. They talked to everyone that knew her and brought in police dogs, helicopters, and divers to help in the search, but found nothing. A 4-week search failed to find her, and they handed the case over to Scotland's Major Investigation Teams, also known as MITs. This is an elite team of detectives that handles major and complex cases around Scotland. The first thing the detectives did was go back to Julie's apartment. They noticed that the house had been thoroughly cleaned, as if someone was trying to hide something. They then used luminol to see if they could find something unusual in the house. Luminol is a type of chemical which is mostly used in crime scenes that have been cleaned up. The chemical detects traces of blood by producing a blue glow that can only be seen in the dark. And what they found was both shocking and disturbing. When they sprayed the luminol in Julie's apartment, they found traces of all over the house, including the living room and bedroom. They also saw what appeared to be a footprint and drag marks heading towards the bathroom. It was pretty obvious that something sinister had happened in that house, and the detectives now had to figure out what exactly happened. Was Julie still alive? If not, what had happened to her? And who had done this? Investigators started looking at the one person that had been close to Julie before she vanished, Andrew Wallace. They found out that Andrew had been telling neighbors that Julie moved to another town. They also found security footage that showed that on February 14th, Andrew had used Julie's card to buy stuff at the grocery store. The detectives questioned Andrews about these activities, but he tried to play dumb by replying to each question with no comment. He was, however, arrested and charged with fraud, giving the detectives time to look more into him. They talked to some of Andrew's friends and got some pretty chilling info. They learned that between February 6th to 10th, Andrew had dropped by one of his friends' houses with scratches on the side of his face and some blood in his hands. When the friend asked him about it, he claimed that he had been in an accident and didn't want to talk about it. Andrew had also gone to another friend's house, carrying 2 large suitcases. He claimed that he had hit a deer while driving and was selling the meat. All this information led investigators to believe that Andrew had done something bad to Julie, really bad, but they couldn't charge him unless they found her remains. When they checked the search history on Andrew's phone, they found some pretty incriminating stuff. One time he looked at the fastest and most effective ways to use and then he searched someone with a He also looked at pictures of knives and suitcases. The detectives were now convinced that Julie's remains were in these 2 suitcases he'd been seen with, and so they started searching the city for any abandoned suitcases. They found several bags that matched the description, but none of them contained human remains. Then, on April 19, 2018, investigators got what they were looking for, but not in the way they expected. A man called the police to report that he'd found what looked like a part in his front yard. Investigators rushed to the scene and found that it was a thigh bone. It was later identified as Julie's through DNA testing. A few days later, another person in the area found Julie's left thigh buried in his front yard. It was now clear that Julie's were spread out in different places in the city. This was a huge blow to the family, who had still been hoping that Julie was only hurt but alive. It was devastating to imagine the kind of horror she went through in the hands of someone she had taken in, thinking he was a friend.
She seemed to have it. She would have looked after him. She'd have given him all the money, wouldn't she?
They tried convincing Andrew to tell them where he had buried the rest of her, but he refused to say anything. Around this time, investigators found some very alarming details about Andrew's past. Apparently, he had done something like this before. In 1992, when he was just 15 years old, he stabbed a woman named Caroline Packer, and she too passed away. At that time, he went by the name Andrew Leadham, and he was only locked up for 10 years. When he got released, he changed his last name and got a job in Glasgow as a butcher. That's where he met Julie, and she became his next target. Andrew later pleaded guilty to killing Julie, and he was sentenced to 28 years in prison. However, he refused to disclose where he had buried the rest of her, Julie's family was desperate. They tried begging and pleading with him to tell them what he had done with her, but he refused.
I hope that if he has a heart, he could now please tell us where he has put my sister and let her come home to be put to rest properly and the dignity she deserves.
Investigators continued searching for her, urging anyone with information to come forward. Then, in June 2019, about a year since her disappearance, Andrew finally came clean. He told the detectives where to find the rest of her. After an agonizing 9 months, Julie's family was finally able to say their farewells to her. She was laid to rest next to her first daughter, who had passed away in December 1993. Julie might have made some mistakes in her past, but she didn't deserve such a ending. Andrew preyed on her vulnerability and trusting nature. He took away her chance of ever making up for the lost time with her daughter or seeing her grandson grow up. As if that's not enough, he mercilessly her family when he refused to tell them what he had done with her. Julie could still be alive if this monster had stayed in prison where he belonged. If you grew up reading fairy tales, you probably know the trope of evil stepmothers. She waltzes into the lives of her stepchildren and turns them into a living nightmare. Just like in the stories of Cinderella and Snow White, usually good triumphs over evil. But what about stepmoms in real life? While some great stepmoms are out there, others take the evil bit to a whole other level. Like in the case of Teresa Balboa. She showed the world that evil stepmothers not only exist, but they're far worse than those we read about in fairy tales. Worst of all, she showed us that not all stories have happy endings. Let's dive in. Samuel was born on May 29, 2015, to Sarah and Dalton. He was a sweet and bubbly boy who loved playing with his toys and watching Toy Story. He attended Hallbrook Elementary, and for the first few years of his life, everything was perfect. But then, in January 2020, his parents got a divorce, and Samuel's world turned upside down. Like a lot of divorces, Sarah and Dalton were involved in a bitter custody battle, in which Sarah was given primary custody of Samuel, while Dalton got visitation rights. However, Dalton failed to return the boy after a weekend visit with his father in 2020. Sarah would later say that the last time she saw her son was at his 5th birthday. Over the next year, Dalton kept Samuel away from his mom, and as much as Sarah tried, she could not get him back. The coronavirus pandemic also made it impossible for her to appear before a family court judge and fight for her son. Then, on May 27, 2021, just a few days before Samuel's 6th birthday, Houston police received a missing persons report. When the officer got to the house in Southwest Houston, they found a devastated Dalton and his then-girlfriend, Teresa. Teresa was also a divorced mom who'd lost custody of her own 2 daughters. Samuel had been living with Teresa and her roommate, Ben Riviera, in Webster, Texas. When the police arrived, Teresa told them that Samuel's mother, Sarah, and a man dressed as a police officer had picked him up that morning. She said that the officer had threatened to charge her with abduction if she did not hand over the boy.
I was going to take Sam to school when his mother showed up with a police officer, what I was under the impression to be a police officer, and they demanded me to release Sam.
However, when the police called Samuel's mother, they quickly realized this couldn't be true when she provided surveillance video from her home to show she couldn't have taken the boy. The officers noticed Teresa's story was not adding up. The last time Samuel was seen by someone outside of his family was on April 30th, the last day he attended school. It was also that day that Teresa started babysitting him. The police found the whole thing weird. They put out an Amber Alert about Samuel to the media as the search began. Volunteers from Texas Eco Search combed through fields searching for the little boy. Teresa, who was also helping in the search, claimed that she had no idea where Samuel was.
I can't say where he could be, where he might be, because honestly, we don't know.
On Samuel's birthday, his mother left a cake, balloons, and candles next to one of his missing persons posters. She also posted on Facebook saying, "I love you, Samuel. I pray you're okay. I love you, my baby. Happy B-Day." The search continued for days, and then on June 1st, police got a tip that led them to a Best Western motel room. And guess who they found there? Teresa herself. She was hiding in the bathroom when the police came in. They asked her where she had taken Samuel. She pointed them to a plastic tote in the room. The tote contained a black plastic bag wrapped around something heavy. When the police opened it, an awful smell filled the room. Inside the bag was the decomposing remains of Samuel. He had been dead for over 2 weeks. Teresa's roommate would later give the police chilling details of how everything happened. He said that on May 10th, he received a call from Teresa saying that Samuel had passed away. When he got home, Ben found the boy all bruised up and lying unresponsive on his bed. He and Teresa then put Samuel in the bathtub and left him there for a couple days. They then wrapped him in a plastic sheet and placed him in a plastic tote that they bought at Walmart. The two of them drove to a storage unit on Highway 3 in Webster and left Samuel's remains there. What's so disturbing about this story is how Ben was willing to help Teresa dispose of Samuel instead of contacting the authorities. I mean, you find a boy on someone's bed and the first thing you think is, hey, let me help you cover this up. You don't call the police, you don't ask questions, you run to Walmart for duct tape and a plastic bag? It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, Samuel's body would stay at the storage unit for several days before Teresa finally decided to move it. The police believe that Teresa planned to go to Houston with Samuel's body before she was arrested. She had reportedly called another friend and told him that she needed help because she'd been in a fight. The friend picked her up at a Walmart parking lot, and they drove to the storage unit to pick up Samuel's body. The man later told the police that he did not know what was in the plastic bin, but the foul smell made him suspicious. They drove for several hours to a motel in Jasper, where the guy booked a room for Teresa under his name. A surveillance video at the motel showed a man and a woman get out of the truck and drag a plastic bin into room 106, and that's where the police found Teresa and Samuel. When the man got home, he called Crime Stoppers and told them where to find Teresa. She was taken into custody and charged with tampering with evidence, in particular human remains. Autopsy reports later showed that Samuel had died from head trauma after being hit with a blunt object. Before this, Teresa had been out on bail after Samuel's father reported her for strangling him in January 2020. The judge released her on the condition that she would stay away from Dalton and his family. The two reconciled sometime later. On June 7th, Teresa appeared in court where her bond was set at $500,000 for the charge of tampering with evidence and another $100,000 for violating her bond condition in the case where she harmed Samuel's father. Samuel's mother was completely devastated by the news of her son's passing. She blamed her ex-husband for what had happened.
Dalton's definitely involved, in my opinion. With all the evidence that has been brought to light, his father is definitely responsible for his death.
Though Dalton denies having anything to do with his son's demise, many people have questioned his innocence. He already knew the kind of person Teresa was, so why did he leave his defenseless son with her? Why did it take him so long to discover that his own son was missing? And why was Samuel staying with Teresa instead of his father? Someone even started an online petition demanding that Dalton be charged alongside Teresa. The petition aims to get 1,000 signatures, and so far they are slightly over 600. Samuel's paternal grandmother, Tanya Olson, has come out to defend her son, saying that he was a good father and would never do anything to hurt his son.
Dalton is not a bad father. He would never harm that baby. He loves him to death. He would die for him.
Teresa is currently at Houston County Jail, awaiting her next court hearing, scheduled for July 29th. Her roommate, Ben Rivera, has also been charged with tampering with evidence. The case is still ongoing, so more changes could be coming up against these two. Meanwhile, Samuel's grieving mother is trying to process her son's brutal killing, saying that she's haunted by the last thing she ever said to him. I told him everything would be okay. It wasn't okay. The circumstances leading to the tragic end of Samuel Olson have left everyone heartbroken and angry. He never even made it to his 6th birthday. Why would anyone harm someone so innocent and defenseless? What's even more alarming, no one noticed his disappearance until it was way too late. By the time they were calling the police, Samuel had been gone for 2 weeks. How is that even possible? The whole situation is just unbelievable. It's heartbreaking to imagine how scared and alone he felt during his last moments. I do hope justice prevails and everyone involved in this case gets what's coming to them. Rest in peace, Samuel. Home is supposed to be the safest place on earth. It is the only place where you can let your guard down, away from all the dangers of the world. But this is not always the case. When a family in California left their little girl at home with her elder brother, they never imagined that she would be harmed in the most brutal way. Let's dive in. Layla Fowler lived in Valley Springs, California, with her dad Barney Fowler, stepmom Krista Walters, and many brothers and sisters. On April 27, 2013, 8-year-old Layla was left under the care of her older brother Isaiah while the rest of the family went to watch a Little League baseball game. At around noon, California police received a call from a distressed woman claiming there was an intruder in her house and that her stepson and daughter were home alone.
My children are at home alone, and a man just ran out of my house. My older son was in the bathroom, and my daughter started screaming. Okay. He came out, there was a man inside of my house. I need an officer there.
This call came from Crystal Walters. She told the dispatcher that her daughter was okay, but really freaking out. She said that she and her husband were on their way home. As officers rushed to the scene, the dispatcher called Isaiah to check how he and his sister were doing. A distraught Isaiah said that he was in the bathroom when he heard a door slam. He then heard someone yelling and banging the bathroom door. When he came out of the bathroom, he saw a Mexican man running through the back door. The man was tall and had long gray hair. When the dispatcher asked him about his sister, he said that the man stabbed her a bunch of times and that she's probably dead. Barney and Crystal came home before the officers. They found Isaiah sitting in the living room with a phone in one hand and a baseball bat in the other. Layla was lying on the floor in her bedroom, unconscious. Barney got closer and saw that she had a bloody cut on her forehead and blood on her shirt. When he lifted her shirt, he saw numerous wounds dotted across her chest. Blood was seeping out from the cuts. Barney picked up his little girl and he could feel her slipping away from him as she carried her out the front door.
I went in and carried my daughter's body out. Couldn't take her to the hospital because I felt she's still alive.
Layla was later pronounced dead at the hospital. The autopsy showed that she had been stabbed more than 70 times in the chest. Her family was totally heartbroken. Who could do such a horrible thing to an innocent girl? The brutal incident shocked the tight-knit community of Valley Springs. They no longer felt safe in their own homes. This was supposed to be a safe community without all the big city crime. Parents were now afraid to let their little ones out to play. Meanwhile, authorities talked to all the residents to see if anyone had noticed anything suspicious on that day. A neighbor from across the street said he didn't see anyone coming out of the house.
Nobody came out that door, plain and simple. I got a German wolf, 95 pounds. Every time somebody walks down that street, they start barking. When this all happened, there was no barks.
But one neighbor said she saw a man running out of the Fowlers' house. She gave a similar description to the one Isaiah had given the officers. Investigators conducted a door-to-door sweep of houses, storage sheds, and horse stables. They even brought in divers to search 2 reservoirs for clues. They also blocked all the roads coming in and out of the neighborhood. Residents had to show their IDs before being allowed to pass. Registered offenders in the area were questioned and ruled out as suspects. For days, the Calvera County Sheriff's Office poured all their time and resources on this case, hoping to provide answers to the family and the community. But every lead came to a dead end. The house showed no sign of a break-in or a robbery. There was nothing to go on except for the word of a 12-year-old boy and a neighbor. No one else in the neighborhood had seen the strange man that the 2 were describing. This neighbor later changed her story, saying that she didn't see anyone.
Meeting, the witness recanted her previous statements and her identification of the man she saw running away. She also refused to provide a description to the sketch artist so that a composite could be completed.
Investigation collected several knives in the house to see if any of them was used in the crime. Meanwhile, a vigil was held for Layla at Jenny Lund School and was attended by hundreds of people. Some of Layla's former classmates wrote notes to her and hanged them at the fence outside the school. One note read, "Dear Layla, you were a fun person and very smart. I enjoyed being around you every minute." Layla's family had on white t-shirts with photos of Layla's smiling face plastered in front. Isaiah was especially devastated and hung on to his dad's arms. He said that he was not saying goodbye to Layla, but rather, see you later. Up to this point, investigators had not considered Isaiah as a suspect, but they continued to talk to him as a witness. They interviewed Isaiah several times to try to get more information on what happened that day, but the more he repeated, the more it sounded weird. There were also some inconsistencies in his story. In his first statement, Isaiah said that the man was yelling and banging the bathroom door, but later he said that he just heard yelling, and the man said, "Hey, I know you're in here, come out," and then he heard Layla screaming. He said that he opened the door to the bathroom to see the man running away, and that that he followed him to the door, but then realized that his sister might need help. He stopped, turned around, and ran towards his sister's room, grabbing a knife from the kitchen counter, just in case there's anyone else. When he reached the bedroom, he saw his sister lying on the floor, her shirt covered in blood. According to him, he dropped the knife and then picked it up before returning to the kitchen and calling Crystal. These are details that he had not provided before, and the officers found it rather suspicious. In another interview, he said that he did not enter Layla's room, but rather stood at the door. But on the day of the incident, the officers had seen some blood on Isaiah's forearm. So how did he get the blood if he never went anywhere near his sister? That and the fact that they found a blood-stained shirt in Isaiah's room made detectives believe that Isaiah could have harmed Layla and then lied about the intruder. Furthermore, a steak knife, which investigators believed to be the used weapon, had been thoroughly washed, though there were traces of human blood. If the evidence happened as Isaiah claimed, why did the intruder wash the knife and return it to the drawer? Though he maintained that he was innocent and stuck to his story of the intruder, Isaiah was arrested and charged with second-degree homicide. Everyone was shocked by this turn of events. How can a 12-year-old boy be capable of such a horrifying crime? They had seen Isaiah grow up, and he never showed any signs that he could cause concern. What would make him turn on his sister like that? He always seemed to get along with Layla. Isaiah's parents were also horrified by the arrest. They didn't believe that their son was capable of hurting his sister.
If I turned my back on him right now and he's innocent, how much more would that hurt him? Right or wrong, I've always stood by my children.
During the trial, the prosecutor said that Isaiah had stabbed his sister, then cleaned himself up before calling for help almost an hour later. She said Isaiah was unusually calm when talking to the police dispatcher, and that he waited 1.5 minutes to report that his sister was hurt. The most distressing part of the trial came when photos of Layla's remains were displayed for everyone to see. A pathologist testified that most injuries were small poking wounds, and it was as if someone was trying to intimidate her before finally finishing her off. If an intruder had broken in and brutally hurt Layla in the small amount of time that Isaiah described, it was doubtful that he would have inflicted such injuries. A forensics investigator also testified that they found traces of blood at the kitchen sink and the door connecting the kitchen to the garage. He also said that the bedroom was much cleaner than the rest of the house. He stated that Layla was attacked on the top bunk bed, but Layla somehow ended up across the room on the floor. There were no bloody footprints to suggest that she had walked there. So, how did she get there? Investigators believed that someone either carried her or threw her from the bed. The prosecution ended their case by saying there's no evidence to support Isaiah's story. The defense, however, argued the investigators did a shoddy job with collecting evidence and that they were in a hurry to arrest Isaiah. He said that Isaiah never changed his description of the intruder and that he was hysterical and crying while on the 911 call. He added that Isaiah had maintained his innocence even when he had got a lot to gain when they offered him a plea deal. He argued that the prosecution failed to show a motive of the slaying, saying that it was unlikely that a boy his age would know how to clean up a crime scene so well. In the end, in October 2015, Isaiah was found guilty and sentenced to 6 years to life as a juvenile offender, which means that he would be staying in juvie until the age of 25. While giving the ruling, the judge said that Isaiah's statements didn't make sense to the court. The Fowler family was outraged. Barney stormed out of court while other family members shouted in disapproval. They later said they were disappointed with the county because they believed the killer was still out there. They pushed for an appeal, saying that Isaiah was wrongly convicted, and in February 2018, the conviction was overturned and Isaiah was given a new trial. But unfortunately for them, Isaiah was found guilty in the new hearing and re-sentenced to stay in juvie until he was 25. So instead of getting his prison time reduced, he got more time. This is a very case, especially since the family lost both a son and daughter. However, it is still interesting to note that while Isaiah was convicted for the crime, some stuff about the case doesn't add up. For example, why didn't the cops find Isaiah's bloody clothes even after searching the house and its surrounding? How can a boy his age know how to clean a crime scene so well? Isaiah took a lie detector test and passed with flying colors. While these may not always be accurate, some experts looked at his test and agreed that the possibility of him lying was 2 out of 1,000. This means that Isaiah must have to be a very good liar. And then there was this male hair that was found on Layla's underwear. It didn't belong to any of Layla's family members or the police. So how did it get there? Who does it belong to? While Isaiah is now serving time for his sister's death, I can't help but wonder, did he do it? Nonetheless, Layla was a sweet and cheerful girl who had her whole life ahead of her. She didn't deserve such a cruel and brutal end. Rest in peace, Layla Fowler. That's the end of our video today. What do you think about this case? What happened in that house? Did Isaiah hurt his sister? Let me know your thoughts thoughts down in the comment section.